Kyle Mercer and Officer Daniels never imagined their paths would collide on a quiet Tuesday night, yet in a single heartbeat. A desperate theft turned into a life-or-death chase that would grip an entire town and leave everyone questioning how quickly ordinary moments could spiral into chaos. The town of Riverbend was the kind of place where people rarely expected trouble. Nestled between rolling hills and a quiet stretch of highway, it lived at an easy pace. Most nights, the streets grew calm after sunset, with only the occasional car passing through the soft glow of street lamps. On this particular Tuesday evening, the chill in the air carried the smell of rain, and the sky was a heavy shade of gray. Inside a small convenience store on the corner of Maple and Pine, the hum of refrigerators and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights filled the silence. Shelves stood in neat rows, stocked with late-night snacks, cold drinks, and the everyday items locals stopped in to grab on their way home. It was the kind of place where the clerk knew most customers by name, and nothing more exciting than a price check ever happened. At around 9 o'clock, the glass door slid open with a quiet chime, and a young man stepped inside. He moved casually, but there was something about his posture that didn't fit the peaceful scene. A black hood shadowed his face, and a worn backpack hung from one shoulder. He paused just inside the entrance as though checking the layout, eyes flicking toward the ceiling where small security cameras blinked red. To anyone glancing his way, he might have looked like a tired traveler or a restless college student, but there was a tension in his shoulders that betrayed a different story. He began walking the aisles with slow, measured steps. His shoes made little sound on the polished floor, and his gaze lingered on the pricier items, electronics near the counter, energy drinks, and small packages of over-the-counter medicine that could fetch quick cash. Every movement seemed casual, yet there was precision in the way he scanned each shelf. He picked up a bag of chips, studied it for a moment, then set it back without care. To the lone cashier behind the counter, he was just another customer killing time before making a late-night purchase. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. A few cars sat beneath the dim lights, their metal surfaces reflecting the occasional drizzle. The quiet created an almost eerie backdrop, broken only by the steady beep of the store's door sensor each time someone entered or left. But no one else came in after the young man. He had the store almost to himself, a perfect setting for someone with plans that didn't involve paying. He drifted toward the refrigerated section, glancing once more toward the front counter. The cashier's attention was buried in a phone screen, giving him the cover he seemed to be waiting for. What no one in that quiet store could know was that his visit wasn't about snacks or soda. Beneath the loose fabric of his hoodie, adrenaline was already pushing his heart to a faster rhythm. The young man wasn't shopping, he was calculating. Every second inside that store was a step deeper into a choice that would turn a peaceful evening into the start of a dangerous chain of events. The young man moved with a kind of careful urgency, gliding from aisle to aisle as if he belonged there. He never hurried, yet each step carried purpose. His eyes darted to the convex security mirror hanging from the ceiling, the reflection bending and warping his figure into a distorted shape. He knew the cameras were watching, but he also knew where their blind spots lay. He had studied the layout earlier that week, slipping in as a regular customer to note where the angles failed and where the cameras overlapped. Now, with the store almost empty and the evening stretching quiet and thin, he put that preparation to use. He started small. A pack of batteries disappeared into the side pocket of his backpack, hidden by the fold of his sweatshirt. Next came a handful of expensive phone chargers, their slim packages sliding soundlessly between the larger items already buried inside. His movements were quick, precise, and surprisingly calm for someone stealing in plain sight. The soft crinkle of plastic wrappers was masked by the hum of refrigeration units and the low whir of ceiling fans. Each item made the bag swell slightly, but he adjusted the straps to keep the shape from betraying the growing weight. Farther down the aisle, he stopped at a display of compact electronics locked behind a glass cabinet. Earlier that evening, an employee had been restocking and left one of the side panels loosely closed. The latch clicked faintly as he tested it. To his quiet satisfaction, it opened with a gentle push. Inside, among headphones and portable speakers, rested a small black handgun meant for licensed display and demonstration. It was supposed to be secured until morning when a manager could return it to the safe. Instead, it sat there as if waiting for him. He hesitated only for a breath before sliding the gun into his bag, wrapping it in a folded sweatshirt to muffle the sound of shifting metal. The air in the store seemed to thicken. He knew the difference between petty theft and a weapon charge, and now he had crossed that invisible line. Sweat collected at the base of his neck even as he forced his face to stay expressionless. The cashier remained at the counter, head lowered over a glowing phone screen, thumbs moving in slow rhythm. A faint smile played across the cashier's face, oblivious to the quiet crime unfolding just a few feet away. Near the entrance, a convex mirror reflected a narrow slice of the parking lot outside. Through the warped glass, the thief noticed headlights sweeping across the asphalt. A vehicle was pulling in, its beams cutting through the damp evening haze. He froze for half a second, his mind racing through options. It was too early for anyone to suspect him, but the sight of a car arriving sent a ripple of urgency through his chest. Without breaking stride, he zipped his bag and swung it over his shoulder, the weight of the stolen items settling like a silent threat. He was ready to leave, but the quiet chime of the door and the flash of headlights promised that the night was far from finished. The door sensor let out a sharp beep as the glass panel slid open, and the sudden sweep of cold air stirred the faint smell of cleaning solution inside the store. A patrol car had pulled into the lot, its headlights washing over the wet pavement in bright streaks of white. The young man felt the shift immediately. His chest tightened, and every sound seemed to sharpen the buzz of the lights above, the distant hum of tires on the highway, the soft click of the door as it closed behind the approaching officer. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, forcing himself to stay casual, but the growing weight of the stolen gun and electronics pressed like a lead block against his spine. Officer Daniels stepped inside with the calm confidence of someone who had walked into hundreds of late-night calls. He wasn't rushing, but his eyes scanned the store with quiet precision. The cashier, startled by the sudden presence of a uniform, set down the phone and looked up, puzzled. The young man caught the officer's reflection in the curved security mirror above the counter, the dark navy uniform standing out sharply against the pale fluorescent glow. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stretch, a silent exchange of awareness crossing the space between them. The thief turned toward the door as if he had simply finished shopping. His movements were smooth, almost lazy, but his pulse raced. The officer shifted slightly, blocking the most direct path to the exit. Their eyes met just for a second, and in that brief glance the young man saw recognition, the kind that meant his plan was unraveling. He didn't wait for words. With a sudden burst of motion, he pushed past a rack of magazines and bolted for the exit. The door flew open with a metallic slam as he burst into the damp night air. Cold mist clung to his face, but he barely felt it. His shoes splashed through shallow puddles as he sprinted across the empty lot. Behind him came the unmistakable sound of pursuit, heavy boots striking pavement, the officer's voice cutting through the night with sharp commands that went unanswered. The thief zigzagged between parked cars, their reflective surfaces turning the lot into a maze of flickering lights. The backpack bounced wildly against his shoulders, the stolen items shifting with each desperate stride. He glanced over his shoulder and saw the officer gaining ground. Panic pushed him faster. He veered sharply toward a row of dumpsters along the edge of the property, hoping to lose his pursuer in the narrow lanes. A loose charger slid from the bag and skittered across the asphalt, but he didn't dare stop. The wet pavement made every step treacherous, and twice he nearly lost his footing as his shoes slid across slick patches of oil-stained concrete. Ahead, a narrow alleyway opened between two buildings, dark and uneven. It was a dead end, but in the rush of adrenaline he saw only a chance to disappear. He darted into the shadows, heart hammering against his ribs, every breath sharp and burning. Behind him, the sound of pursuit grew louder, closer, and unavoidable. The alley was a narrow corridor of cracked concrete and dripping pipes, the kind of forgotten space where sound seemed to echo and trap itself. The young man skidded to a stop halfway down, chest heaving as the misty air clung to his skin. The walls loomed high and close, slick with moisture, leaving no path forward except a chain-link fence at the far end. He glanced at it, gauging the climb, but the top bristled with coiled wire that shimmered under the dim light of a flickering street lamp. Escape in that direction would be nearly impossible. Behind him, the heavy rhythm of boots striking pavement grew louder, steady, and relentless. Officer Daniels entered the mouth of the alley with a flashlight cutting a pale beam through the shadows. The officer's breathing was steady despite the chase, a quiet contrast to the thief's frantic gasps. The young man's mind raced. He could feel the weight of the stolen gun inside his backpack, the cold shape of it pressing against his side like a dare. Every instinct screamed at him to keep running, to find some impossible exit, yet his legs refused to move. The realization that he was cornered pressed down like a physical force, tightening around his chest until thought itself felt dangerous. In a sudden surge of desperation, he swung the backpack off his shoulder and yanked at the zipper. The metallic rasp of teeth separating filled the narrow space, followed by the dull clatter of shifting electronics. His fingers closed around the grip of the stolen handgun. It was cold and heavier than he remembered, a lifeless weight that carried the promise of power. For a split second he hesitated, his pulse pounding so hard it blurred the edges of sound. The officer froze several feet away, one hand hovering near his holster, the beam of the flashlight steady on the suspect's face. Instead of aiming the weapon, the young man did something reckless and unpredictable. With a guttural burst of adrenaline, he lunged forward. His shoes scraped against the wet ground as he lowered his shoulder and charged. The move was sudden and violent, a flash of motion that shattered the fragile stillness of the alley. Officer Daniels reacted instantly, stepping back and bracing for impact while keeping his hand near his sidearm. The beam of the flashlight wavered across the walls, throwing jagged shadows that made the scene feel unreal. The collision was chaotic. The backpack swung wildly, knocking against the concrete wall as the young man slammed into the officer. Their bodies tangled in a blur of limbs and desperate force. The gun slipped from his grasp and struck the ground with a metallic clang that echoed like a warning shot. The officer grappled to keep control, using his weight to pin the suspect while avoiding the slick puddles beneath them. For a tense moment, the outcome balanced on a knife-edge edge to bodies locked in a struggle where a single wrong move could turn a frantic chase into a tragedy. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing sharper with every passing heartbeat. Backup arrived just as the struggle reached its peak. Two additional officers burst into the alley, flashlights slicing through the darkness, their voices cutting sharp commands over the sound of pounding hearts and rain dripping from the rooftops. The young man thrashed against the officer holding him, wild energy fueled by panic and the adrenaline that had carried him through the chase. The clatter of the fallen gun against the wet concrete echoed off the walls, a stark reminder of the dangerous gamble he had taken. Within seconds, the backup officers moved in, pinning him securely to the ground. He continued to resist for a heartbeat longer, but the sudden force and coordination left no room for escape. The fight drained out of him as quickly as it had flared, leaving only the heavy breaths of exhaustion and shock. Once restrained, investigators arrived and began piecing together the events. The young man, later identified as 22-year-old Kyle Mercer, was led away in handcuffs, his backpack still sagging with the stolen items. Interviews and review of the store's surveillance footage revealed a story that made the incident even more perplexing. Kyle had no previous history of violent behavior. His record was minor at most, a string of small misdemeanors, none involving confrontation or weapons. Yet, desperation had pushed him to a point where he risked everything. The handgun he had stolen was actually a display piece, completely unloaded, yet the illusion of danger had driven him to charge an armed officer in a reckless attempt to escape. Investigators pieced together the motive, uncovering a web of financial strain and poor choices. Kyle had accumulated significant debt through illegal online gambling. Bills and pressure from lenders weighed heavily on him, and the act of shoplifting had been a last-ditch effort to regain control over his life, a reckless gamble fueled by desperation rather than malice. The escalation from a simple theft to a dangerous confrontation highlighted how quickly circumstances could spiral beyond control. It was a moment where planning met panic, and adrenaline collided with reality. The legal repercussions were severe. Kyle faced charges of armed robbery and assault on a law enforcement officer. Even though the gun was not loaded, the law treated the presence of a firearm as a critical factor in determining the seriousness of the offense. The courtroom proceedings later focused on his decision-making in that moment, the decision to flee, the choice to charge the officer, and the reckless risk he had imposed on himself and those around him. Prosecutors emphasized that appearances alone could escalate a situation into something life-threatening, and that the boundaries between crime and catastrophe were often thinner than people realized. In the end, the incident left a lasting mark on Riverbend. The quiet town had glimpsed how ordinary spaces could become dangerous in a single evening. Store owners and residents reflected on the fragility of routine and the sudden impact of desperation-driven choices. The story of Kyle Mercer became a cautionary tale, a reminder that decisions made under pressure could spiral into moments of real danger, and that even a display weapon and a moment of panic could transform a minor theft into a night-long ordeal.